Evening, everybody. What is the bigger calamity? And in this instance, we're going to have another, I'm going to ask that question again, but in this instance, plastic and straws. Are straws the problem? Prairie Captain is tweeting, quote, "Welcome to the stupidest government Canada has ever allowed to govern." At Catherine McKenna, at Liberal Party, at Justin Trudeau. Really? Straws are the problem? Well done, asshats. Packaging for one joint. Here we go, 36 seconds, and yeah, we're watching it all.
Oh, I didn't get it in.
One doobie. It's the saddest thing I've ever seen. Oh my god.
So let's talk about plastic straws, shall we?
And there you have it. The packaging for one joint in Canada. You know, you've got to have the locks and got to make sure kids can't get into it, and maybe parents can't get into it if they've got kids. So, you know, whatever. And we'll get to the kids. But are plastic straws really the biggest problem when one joint is packaged like that? Are we may be focusing on the wrong thing when we're sending billions of dollars outside of Canada and allowing people in Quebec to discharge human feces into the St. Lawrence? Are we maybe focusing on the wrong pollution? Really? I mean, this seems crazy. Which ocean are we dumping our straws into? Could you point it out to me here in Ontario? No? Are we sending enough garbage to China that they're sending our straws to the ocean via their rivers? Here is the main part of today's video. And my question is, what is the bigger calamity? Is global warming the thing that Canada needs to really focus on, or is fixing the refugee problem the thing that we need to focus on? Because I don't think that we can do both. And I think you'll understand what I mean by the time we get to the end of this video. But to prep this video, there is a heavy and consistent push to tell Canadians on one side, Canada needs to grow at a never-ending pace. We should be at 100 million population by 2100. There's a ton of people and organizations and taxpayer dollars going to that initiative. And on the other side, don't have children. Because if you have children, you will destroy the world. You will destroy the world by increasing the population of humans. And humans, of course, by virtue of living on the planet, are destroying the world. Despite the fact that, I mean, we've been here for a blink of an eye, and the world will last much longer, long after we're gone. So, I don't know. As much as I am interested, I'm not here to debate whether or not global warming is happening or not, but I want to point out this flaw, which in the reasoning. So we're bringing people in, but telling Canadians don't have children. So which is it? Do we need to bring people in at a never-ending pace and contribute to the destruction of the world? Or do we need to not have any more population and learn how to deal and become a productive society with a lower population, become a society that can grow its economy with a lower consistent population? It would seem that the second would be the choice that we're making because we're moving to automation, right? So we need to start learning how to deal with our population and bring it down to a manageable level that continues to propagate through time, right? We want to keep our country strong and free, the Canada of yore. Yes or no? No, that's not what's going to happen. Here's the National Post reporting, without immigration, Canada's growth could be close to zero in 20 years if low fertility rates persist. So I'm just going to read choice portions of this article. The link is in the description if you'd like to read it for yourself. Here's the first part I'm going to read. Quote, "Clark is among a growing portion of Canadian women choosing to have only one child or none at all. And that trend toward limited childbearing is increasingly reflected in Canada's average fertility rate, which 2016 census figures released Wednesday have pegged at 1.6 children per woman, slightly higher than the 1.59 posted by Statscan 3 years earlier. One outlier is Nunavut. They have the highest fertility rate in Canada. The fertility rates refer to the number of children a hypothetical woman would have over the course of her reproductive life, based on females aged 15 to 49. older and younger are not likely to have children. In Canada, that rate has been steadily falling over the last several decades. 1971 was the last year when the average number of children matched the 2.1 replacement level needed for the population to renew itself without being bolstered by immigration. So if you think about that, mom and dad have 2 kids, that replaces mom and dad. You have 3, you have a growing population, right? Everybody has 3 kids, or some people have 4 and some people have 2. You have a growing population. But if everybody just has 2, then you have you can maintain your population over time, right? Back to the article. Quote, one of the major reasons people are having fewer children is a combination of circumstances and biology, she said. More women are choosing to start a family later in life compared to earlier generations. In the 1960s, for instance, the average age for the first birth was about 22. Today, that age has been pushed to 30 and beyond. Quote, the longer you delay having the first, the shorter the window you have to have more, said Spinks. There's a point at which you can no longer conceive as effectively as you were when you were younger. So that's where the biology comes in. The cost of child rearing, from daycare to school-based activities to socking away dollars for post-secondary education, is another criteria element that often dictates family size. And social demographer Susan McDaniel, a Canadian research chair in global population and life course at the University of Lethbridge. Quote, children cost a lot, and that's in terms of money, but also in terms of opportunity cost, she said, referring to women's participation in the workforce, including those building or maintaining a career, as well as time invested ferrying kids to and from such extracurricular activities as hockey practice and ballet lessons. I scroll down again, and I just scroll down all the way here now. This is the end. I thought this was funny, and I wanted to point it out. As for Canada, immigration has been the lifeblood of population growth since 1999. That's 20 years. About 2/3 of current expansion is driven by the arrival of new Canadians. 2/3, while natural increases make up the remaining third, according to the Statistics Canada. That's natural-born Canadians having children, right? That's 1/3 of our population currently, of our projected population, right? Back to the article. Based on a medium growth scenario, immigration could account for more than 80% of the country's population increase beginning in 2031, the agency says. Without sustained level of immigration, it says Canada's growth rate could be close to 0 in 20 years as the population ages and projected fertility rates lag replacement level. So we're not having enough babies. I wanted to show you this chart, and I've used this chart many times. It's a Statscan chart, 150.statscan.gc.ca. Link is in the description. And this is the fertility rates plotted from 1926 to 2011. I wanted to show you how much lower than the Great Depression we currently are. And that has to give people pause. It should give people pause. So 1926, people were having between 3 and 4 children, right? 1931, between 3 and 4, 1933 between 2 and 3, and that stayed steady all through the Great Depression, all through the 30s. 1937 was the lowest birth rate during the Great Depression at 2.64. And as you move through the Second World War, 1990 or 1944, it rebounds back to 3, and people continue having between 3 and 4 children all the way up until the introduction of the birth control pill. And then the birth rate starts to decline at a very rapid pace, and it sits at 1.6. That is not replacement. 1.6, 1.7, and it's bounced around there. 1.61 is actually close to where we're at right now. But my point is, the Great Depression was a very stressful time, and people had no money, and we're at half the birth rate. And yes, we have birth control, but is that the only reason? Is that the only reason that it's cut in half? And is that a positive thing? Is that the intended consequence? If we look back at newspapers for when the birth control pill came in, people were worried about exactly this outcome. They were worried that people would stop having children, we wouldn't be able to populate Canada, and we would need to rely on immigration. And this was a problem in the 1960s. This was a conversation that was necessarily had by the people back then. And Mr. Pierre Elliott Trudeau made multiculturalism the law of the land, and then Brian Mulroney signed it into law, making 1987 making it the law of the land in Canada. So Trudeau started it, Mulroney signed it into law. But it's interesting now that we are in a situation where our aging population, in order to maintain the entitlements, healthcare, CPP, all of the things that you pay into, we need to continue to have this expanding, growing economy in order to pay for that stuff. That's why we need immigrants. right? But the reason we need immigrants is because in the 60s we decided, in the 60s and 70s, Canada decided, yeah, that's the direction we want to go. So it's interesting that what was sold then as a solution that would bring further peace and prosperity, more money for everybody, and kumbaya, doesn't that make everything better? But I mean, look at Toronto and look at the violence, the increase in violence, and look at the crime. Look at the billions of dollars of money laundered in Vancouver and Toronto real estate. These are the effects of corruption and rot in a society that has not been well cared for by the people who were supposed to be caring for it. I'm looking at you, John Chrétien. I'm looking at you, Paul Martin. I'm looking at you, Justin Trudeau. These people have systemically sold us out. So again, what's the biggest problem? Is it saving refugees or is it climate change, right? We have this problem that Canada needs to rely on immigration as a tool to maintain our luxurious lifestyle. But now there's a climate crisis, according to everybody and his dog. And one of the main reasons, or one of the ways to save the world, is to stop having children. Here's CBC reporting, don't think you can make a difference in the climate crisis? Meet some experts who say you're wrong. And this one, you don't have to look far before you see the big yellow chart that has having one fewer child will save, about 58.6 tons of CO2 per year. Oh, how do they calculate that, you wonder? I wondered that too. We find out here. National Post is reporting, serious about stopping climate change? Have one less child, UBC says. And I've got things highlighted here, so I'm starting in about the middle of the article. It says, the study surveyed Canadian high school textbooks from several provinces and found that students rarely, if ever, learned about the most effective ways to reduce climate change. Here, I'm going to scroll up and show you again the most effective way to reduce climate change. Yes, let's teach our children that. But I digress. Back to the article. The studies surveyed Canadian high school textbooks from 7 provinces and found... I doubled back here. I apologize. Scroll down. The biggest and perhaps most controversial of the study's suggestions is having fewer children. The data that backs up the assertion is wildly complicated. To figure out the footprint of having one child, the calculation looks at the emissions that child and all their descendants will create in their lifetime if average emissions rates stayed at current levels. So a mother is considered responsible for half of her children's emissions. The father takes the other half. She's also responsible for a quarter of her grandchildren's emissions, an eighth of her great-grandchildren's emissions, and so on. The total is divided by the average lifespan to get an annual emissions output. So if a person lives to 80, the total output of their share of dependents gets divided by 80. So not only are children ridiculously expensive, but here's some guilt. You're killing the planet. And, if you live to be 80, you get to divide it by 80. But if you live to be 90, you get to divide it by 90. So, hey, Grandma, can you live another 10 years? My carbon footprint's a little high. Here's the last bit of the article. Wins said he's doing his part. He doesn't have kids, but when the time comes, the environmental impact will inform how big his family gets. He doesn't own a car and takes long train rides instead of flying. Quote, I eat mostly a vegetarian diet, but if my buddy is about to throw out a half of his hot dog, I'll finish it off for him because I don't like food waste either. Oh man, can you imagine having a vegan dude hanging around all the time hoping that you didn't finish your hot dog so that he could eat some meat? I mean, oh my God. What in the... This is the National Post. Like, dude, go get your own... I'll pay for your hot dog, man. Like, I'll pretend that I'm going to throw it out and you can just eat it. Here's a Syrian... This is a Syrian refugee sponsored another Syrian refugee family, and the family of 8 arrived in Canada. So mom and dad and 6 kids. So are they responsible for all of their descendants' CO2 in Canada? Are you seeing where this is going yet? I know it took me a long time to get here. I apologize that it has taken me a while to get to the point. But yeah, if we keep importing people from high carbon areas, well, it doesn't make any sense because we're stopping having kids. Canadians stopped having kids in the 60s, right? We're doing our part, but we keep importing people who are having kids, a lot of kids. We're bringing them here and then hoping they adopt birth control, despite them being culturally, I'm pretty sure that Sharia law and all of that stuff. And I don't know much about Islam or what Syrians do generally, but I'm not sure that their birth rate is going to fall in line with Western mores and norms. it's a viable question. Are we trying to save the world, or is it just feel good numbers? And oh, by the way, we've got to reduce our carbon footprint, but whatever, we've got to save the refugees too. Which one is it? Which one's more important? Are they both important? If they're both important, can we do both? Does it make sense to do both? Well, here's Canada's refugees, where they come from by the numbers. And this is up to 2005 to 2014. I don't have too much more up-to-date numbers here, but I'm just using these as examples from where people are coming from. All of these countries are low carbon countries. And that's not me saying that. So here's 2004 to 2013, Colombia, China, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Haiti, Mexico, India, and the US. And here is a handy graph that says data blog, facts are sacred. Carbon emissions per person by country. Why does that matter? Here it is. Looking at a country's total carbon emissions doesn't tell us the full story of a country's contribution to global warming. China, for example, is the world's quote, leader in total emissions, 6,018 meters squared metric tons of carbon dioxide since it overtook the US in 2007. But all that really tells you is that China is a fast developing country with a lot of people. Yeah, right. Okay, back to the article. A more useful measure is carbon emission per capita, per person. Under that measurement, the average American is responsible for 19.8 tons per person, and the average Chinese citizen clocks in at 4.6 tons. Examining CO2 per capita around the world also shows us the gulf between the developed world's responsibility for climate change and that of the developing world. While Australia is on 20.6 tons per person, partly because of its reliance on CO2-intensive coal, and the UK is half that at 9.7, India is a mere 1.2. Poorer African nations such as Kenya are on another magnitude less. Again, the average Kenyan has a footprint of just 0.3 tons, a figure that's likely to drop with the country's surge in wind power. So where does Canada fall? Here it is in 2006, and I apologize, the numbers aren't more up to date, but per capita, Canada has 18.81. India has 1.6. Iran, 7.5. Mexico, 4.5. Pakistan, 0.78. Iraq, 0.369. Colombia, 0.142. Syria, 2.71. So Sri Lanka, 0.61. Sudan, 0.32. Congo, 1.49. I'm just using these as an example. And these countries are taken from these lists. Some nations weren't on the list, so I used neighbors. Like Eritrea here is not on this list here. And I know I said that incorrect, but whatever. That's not the point of the video. So the point of the video is, one, is global warming the biggest challenge facing humanity, or is it refugees? And if it's refugees, can we save the refugees without bringing them to a carbon intensive country like Canada that has 18% or 18, where is it? Emissions per capita, 18.81 emission per capita, versus every country has at less than half of what Canada produces. So every person we bring increases our carbon footprint in this country. So could we not do it in a more efficient way? Is there not a more intelligent way to solve both problems? I think there is. I really do think there is. So it seems insane to be bringing refugees into Canada from low carbon countries at a breakneck pace, when the biggest threat to humanity, according to any newspaper that you look at in 2019, is climate change, right? So why are we exacerbating it? Why are we increasing our carbon footprint for a short-term payout? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So that's what I think about. That's where my brain goes. I've been looking at this grouping of tabs all day and trying to come up with the story to tell you, because I like to come up with a story to tell you. It has to flow. It has to make sense. Why are they telling us to stop having babies while at the same time wholesale importing families of 8 and 10, and then paying for those people, and then saying to Canadians, you guys have to save up for, kids are expensive. You've got to save up for post-secondary and daycare and school-based activities and all of those costs. And that doesn't matter here. That doesn't matter. So this propaganda push, it doesn't make sense anymore. I mean, if you've got cognitive dissonance and don't do any looking into where these people are coming from and what kind of climate and what kind of environment and what kind of carbon footprint they have, if that's important to you and you can't talk about that and you haven't thought about this, come on, you're not serious. You're mouthing talking points that the news has told you. We're all going to die. It's happening now. Yeah, well, yeah. Everybody's ticking closer to their own death one day at a time, but man, I don't think it's the world that's going to kill us. I don't think climate change is going to do it. That's just me. But I think there are more pressing problems and more intelligent ways to solve them than the ways this government and the past few governments, Harper government included, have solved these problems. How does throwing more people at this problem solve it? It doesn't. It exacerbates it. So why is our government doubling down on this approach? It makes no sense. It's tone deaf, just like everything else. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for going on this trip with me, and have a wonderful evening. Check out thepeoplespartyofcanada.ca.